Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Just waiting for folks to fully appear in the room. Nice to see everyone. Thanks for joining us for this first time Cleveland Documenters panel discussion on live tweeting best practices. I'm Lawrence Caswell, part of the Cleveland Documenters team. No, I am not in a closet, even though it may feel like I am in a closet. I'm definitely not in the closet. But thanks for joining us for this panel discussion on live tweeting best practices with three of our best live tweeters. Cleveland Documenters has been around since about November of 2020, and the three folks who I'm about to introduce in just a little bit have been among our best live tweeters in the couple of years here, almost 3 years, 2.5 years now that we've been live tweeting. I want to introduce them, and they'll all three give brief introductions of themselves. And then we'll get to the questions. I'll say, please feel free to open up your chat. We have folks here, Doug and Anastasia, folks who are Cleveland Documenters are familiar with. They're the ones who you talk to while you're on assignment and make the assignments and write your feedback. They'll be in the chat posting, responding to questions, raising questions up. The chat, as a lot of you know, during our gatherings is a really active place, and we encourage it to be active, so don't feel like you can't type in there. So feel free to drop questions as we go. We'll do our questions for the first 25 or 30 minutes or so, probably 25 minutes or so now. And then we will open things up to more questions in the second half hour of this conversation. But as I said, don't feel like you have to wait to drop questions in the chat. We'll get going. So I'd like to introduce our panelists today. Again, I'm going to let them introduce themselves. I'm just going to toss it to them. So the first person I would like to introduce is our a Cleveland documenter and also Signal Cleveland's freelance audio producer, who actually puts together the radio version and podcast version of the public meetings report. This is the report that we do that honestly Doug and Anastasia are part of writing based on Documenters assignments. We turned that into a radio show, and that is produced by Gennifer Harding-Gosnell. Gennifer.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gennifer Harding, and I am an OG at live tweeting. I've been doing it 2 years, 3 years, however long we've been at it. I've been along for the ride since almost the beginning.
Sweet. Thanks, Gennifer. Next up, I'd like to introduce Najee Hall. Najee came to us as a documenter. Actually, I was just trying to think. I don't actually remember how long you've been a documenter with us, Najee. It's been a minute, but I don't actually remember when the start was. But Najee started with us as a documenter and is now actually Signal Cleveland's community reporter, leading our central listening team and all the work they're doing, including fantastic spelling bee in the central neighborhood that's going on this Saturday. Najee.
Good afternoon, cousins. So I'm Najee. I'm a community reporter for Signal, like he said. I think I've been with the Documenters for about 2 years. I was creeping on you guys for a long time, but then I finally jumped in. So maybe 2-3 years ish. But yeah, been there and was a tweeter regularly, so I'm happy to be here.
Thanks, Najee. And last but definitely not least is Dan McLaughlin, yet another one of our superstar live tweeters. Dan is, among other things, Dan started doing, I know the folks, those of you who have done notes assignments know that we have spots to sort of leave summary bullets and follow-up questions. Dan was one of the first ones to sort of add that on his own to his Twitter thread, among many other things. Dan's a great live tweeter, but Dan.
Hey everybody, my name's Dan. I live in West Park neighborhood. I don't know how many folks, since it's network wide, how many folks are Cleveland people here, how many folks are like beyond Cleveland, but I live in West Park. I think I signed up for the second Documenters training here in Cleveland, so I don't get the bragging rights of saying I was there in Act 1, Scene 1, but that's definitely there in Act 1. So thanks for having me here.
Sweet, thanks. I don't know. I feel like you have plenty of other bragging rights to get to. As I was sort of setting up those introductions, I have other questions that are more about live tweeting, but it occurs to me a question, as you guys know, and everyone who's gone through Cleveland Documenters orientation knows, we really talk about documenters coming into this for a lot of different reasons and from a lot of different ways. And so honestly, before we even get to live tweeting, I kind of want to ask, when you, which, and let me toss this to Dan first, as we're just talking about it. When you first signed up for Documenters, like what were you looking for?
Well, it was the end of 2020 and I was unemployed. So first and foremost, I was looking for a way to get some money coming in. But you know, it also seemed like something I had kind of been aware of the Documenters kind of building in Cleveland for a while before, and it just sounded really interesting. And, you know, also being out of work at the moment meant I had some time, and it's like, let me see what I can do and what I can learn. Yeah.
All right, sweet. Thanks, Dan. What about you, Najee? What was the when you first signed up at Documenters.org, and what were you looking for?
I was definitely looking to get involved. I just felt during that time there was a lot of sadness, and there still is in some, degrees. But I just felt helpless, and I just wanted to do something to be more active and be more engaged, I guess you would say. So that definitely led me. And of course, similar to Dan, I was freelancing for my life that particular year. So the money was nice too.
Yeah, thank you. What about you, Gennifer? Why'd you sign up when you first signed up at the very start of for Documenters? Because really, when you first signed up, we didn't have any Documenters. We hadn't been doing anything. There was nothing but like, we didn't even do press releases. So there wasn't even like hype about us. So what brought you to us?
I don't remember exactly where I found out about Documenters. I want to say it was Facebook or Twitter. It was one of the social media accounts. And either you guys had an advert out or it was a story that someone did about you guys just starting. And that was where I found out about you. It was one of those two, but I'm not sure which. And I come from a journalism background. So this was very much about like building skills for me and kind of getting me some experience that at that point I hadn't really had outside of writing for music and the arts. Because I had always taken an interest in political matters, that it just kind of seemed up my alley. So.
Thanks, Gennifer. Let's get into this Twitter conversation. And Gennifer, I'm going to toss it back to you. If you wouldn't mind, could you tell us about the first time you live tweeted a meeting? Particularly, I'm not actually tossing to you because we were just talking, but also because you were likely the one who did it for us earliest. I don't mean as of the three of you here. I don't mean of all Cleveland Documenters. But you talk a little bit about your first live tweeting experience.
Yeah. I was absolutely mortified. I thought for sure I was going to get everything wrong. I'm not going to be able to keep up with what they're saying. I don't really have the best understanding of what they're talking about because this isn't my background or my expertise. And I almost felt like I was going to be way in over my head. And I fumbled around with it a lot, but because I know how to write a story in a journalism sense, I was able to use that knowledge to then put that into, how to structure the live tweet thread. And then I went through the live tweeting guide that you guys gave out at the training.
Okay. The Documenters Field Guide or our own best practices guide?
I think the Documenters Field Guide.
Okay.
Went through that and I pulled out all of the pieces, everything that was a requirement, everything that I needed, and then put that into a template for myself so I could see, like, I can make sure, okay, this is almost like a checklist of all the things I need to have and make sure that I include. And then how do I structure the live tweeting around that? So I went and looked at things that other people had done, other journalists had done, like live tweeting, to see how they did it. I thought about how I had been taught to write a story, and I took all of that information and just sort of built it into this template that I could use for myself to then create a live tweet thread. And I've used that ever since.
And so,
So-
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. No, I was just gonna say that mortified feeling, and that you think you're way over your head, that is perfectly normal to have. Perfectly normal.
So that's interesting because about that, thinking about that template that you created. I mean, that template, as anyone who's been through our live tweet training of the past, like, I don't know, year and a half or so, like we share that template out with documenters as an example of not something that came from us, but something that came from you, a documenter, about how to really handle live tweet assignments. But I don't think I realized that you did that like after your first assignment. I mean, was it that mortifying that you were like, I need some more setup?
No, I don't remember if I did. I probably did it before the first one.
Oh,
Because I know how I am, and being prepared for things is like a big deal for me.
mm,
I have to absolutely be prepared for something, or it's going to be complete chaos. So my bet is that I did that in advance just to make sure that I was as prepared as I could be, just because that's my nature.
Yep.
But I will say that a lot of your success is based in your ability to prepare beforehand.
yeah. It's so interesting just compared to the notes. I mean, it's not that you can just come to the notes not doing anything, but to be honest, you can do a lot less of prep for the notes than you need to for live tweeting. You could really like read through some ordinances and then show up and talk about what happened. But for live tweeting, you do have to have a little bit of you don't need to know what's happening, but you need to know, like, what are the things that I need to have ahead of time that I can drop in. Najee, what about you? Would you talk a little bit about your first live tweeting experience?
Sure. It was a committee meeting, I think. It was definitely a city council meeting during the daytime. So I know it was probably a committee meeting. But I have been tweeting for years. You couldn't keep me off Twitter at one point. And so I used to like live tweet TV shows and all sorts of things. So I just was already kind of comfortable with that because of doing that on my own time. So and for me, I like things that are just efficient, just boom, boom, done. And I just felt like tweeting was, for me, easier to just relay the information out and capture details, in a way. At the time when it was 140 characters, it does kind of force you to make sure you're getting to the point, and finding that balance. So that was my experience, but it went well. I agree with Gennifer, just maybe preparing, just small things that you can do. Maybe trying to figure out if you prefer to tweet from your phone versus a PC versus a tablet. Those can offer different dynamics as well. So I think just identifying what device you're most comfortable with can definitely help. And I had a pretty good first experience, I feel like.
Yeah. That's interesting. I mean, I know this, but I actually have forgotten how active, like, I know this from like you beginning tweeting and then me looking at your account, how active you were on Twitter. But it actually makes me wonder, Gennifer, going back to you, I know that you said you had some journalism experience ahead of time, but did you actually have like any experience with Twitter at all before you started live tweeting assignments?
Very, very little. I had actually been, I had an account set up when I was overseas. And when I was writing for the Surrey Comet and the Kingston papers, we all had to have a Twitter handle. And so I ended up creating one back then and would use that for stories, but that was all part of the journalism program.
Mm.
Once I came back, I wasn't a fan of Twitter, so I just kind of didn't really use it until it came to this. And I thought, well, I know I can live tweet because I know how to use Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
And that was what made my final decision for that.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thanks. Dan, what about you? Could you talk a little bit about your first live tweeting experience?
Sure. Yeah, my first live tweeting experience was also my first experience tweeting, period. I had a Twitter account set up because I listen to Cleveland sports on the radio, and every now and then I want to see that fast break, like a clip of it, right? Or a spectacular catch in center field or something. So like 10 minutes later, I go to Twitter and find it. But I never sent anything before. My first meeting, I was doing some reflecting on this, was a RTA committee meeting, I'm pretty sure.
Mhm.
And I spent, like we heard, a lot of time going through the materials, which actually set me up kind of poorly for future tweeting experiences, because they actually had like the slideshow available, and I was able to prepare enough that I sort of like felt like I knew exactly how this meeting was going to go. I felt like I had like the script, right?
Yep.
And in many ways through that meeting I did. And so really briefly, if I could also talk about my second live tweeting experience.
Because I'm already feeling a rope-a-dope coming.
Yeah, it was a Cleveland City Council meeting where it's like none of that was true. Like there was an agenda that like had no like materials attached to it. Plus that agenda changed like, you know, in the hours or minutes even before the meeting. And so my expectation of like, I know how this is going to go was completely shattered. And I was you know, it was a little bit destabilizing, but it taught me that like preparation is good, but you can't rely on it. Just because you don't know how the meeting's going to go, and you don't know how any individual agency is going to share information ahead of time, or help you to prepare.
Yeah.
So preparing is good, but like it's not everything.
Dan, that makes me think of, honestly, that kind of leads me to my next question. And you could use the example that you used, or you could use another one. I'm sort of curious thinking about that, the difference between your first and second meeting and the information available. I'm also just curious in general, like what sort of challenges you have faced during like tweeting an assignment, a specific assignment, and how did you think about? I mean, I think the thing that I like about your first two assignment story, and like actually you sort of hear it in what all three of you said, is that well, you guys all now know that we're not stressed about like how a single assignment goes. I don't need a single assignment to be perfect. We really see this as a learning community. So it's really like what you do next, what do you do differently next time. So I'm really curious about a challenge you faced while live tweeting, and then how you adjusted. I mean, in some ways you just told the story, but I'm wondering if you maybe have another one or could elaborate on that a bit.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I learned, especially with Cleveland City Council meetings, but with any agency, you know, double check the agency website for any last minute changes to the agenda, because it happens. And again, like there's no worse feeling like thinking you know what's going to play out, and then all of a sudden something totally different is happening. And I would say also, just as somebody who was brand new to tweeting, like I've had, and I still experience challenges like with like threads and like threading tweets together, especially when they start going on and on and on, and I might like accidentally like split the thread. So just, you know, in terms of preparation and preparing for a challenge, like one of the first things I did, because I had no followers on Twitter, I didn't feel bad about doing this. Like I just like started a fake thread, like this is a tweet, this is a second tweet that I'm adding into it, like here's a quote of that tweet, and like just, you know, knowing how those functions work, because I didn't. And I knew I was going to have to like do those things in real time and maybe like kind of rapid fire. So like, you know, just having some like hands-on experience with that was really useful for me.
I think that's really good advice, particularly, I mean, I think we hear from a lot of new live tweeting documenters is just about like the pressure of doing this thing, particularly with folks who've done notes and know like, oh, I'm going to write these notes and then I'm going to send them to the documenters team and they're going to look at them. But that idea of being live and broadcasting everything out, I feel like a lot of stress for folks, but also like what I like about your story, Dan, is it shows that like you can still test stuff out. I mean, like I know you didn't have any people following your Twitter thread, but also even if you do, you could do a test like that, and there's no harm to it. You know what I'm saying? But anyway, what about you, Najee? What's a challenge you faced while on a live tweeting assignment, and how'd you make an adjustment after that?
I would probably say like I had got to a point where I was tweeting like too much. Like if somebody sneezed, I tweeted. If somebody blinked, I tweeted. Like it was just, you knew everything that was going on. And then one day, Doug sent me this email that was basically like, you're doing too much, which I appreciated though, because in my head, I was like, this is starting to feel like more laborious than it should be. But at the same time, you just want to make sure that people are given all the information. But then I had to realize like, these are meant to be like summaries, which is literally what notes and things are. So if somebody wants the full, pizza, they need to just go to the meeting probably. So it's just more like bullets. And then once I understood like, okay, like just what's really important here. If somebody says, 6 phrases, how can you mesh that maybe into 2 little sentences, that can just condense information and how people receive information, because too much information can be just as bad as not enough information.
Najee, that actually makes me think of another question that I have, and I want to ask the challenge question to you, Gennifer, but I sort of want to skip ahead to this question because I feel like it's come up, that piece of the pressure and the pressure to also feel like you need to get as many details as possible has come up a couple of times. And we talk about it a lot during our training, and we talk a lot about, I feel like to my mind, and I don't know, Doug and Anastasia, I feel like that's the biggest challenge for folks picking up live tweeting. Like there's just you really do have to decide like what's important a little bit more than you need to decide in the notes. But I also feel like the 3 of you have consistently submitted like live tweet threads that were informative and accessible, but also joyful and fun. But I guess what I'm thinking about is that pressure and feeling like you can capture things, and also the meeting being on YouTube. YouTube is really useful for live tweeting, streaming meetings, because you can pause and rewind. But I also feel like for a lot of documenters, especially those feeling that pressure, whether it's pressure to be exact and to get all the information, or just that sort of pressure of being like live, of broadcasting with every tweet. I also feel like that pressure causes documenters to overuse that YouTube's pause and rewind functions, and end up really spending more time covering the meeting than the length of the meeting. And Najee, you've talked about this, but maybe if you could, I'm curious, and I would like to hear this from all of you, like how do you really deal with that pressure to capture everything while delivering a concise thread? Like I know you got that advice from Doug, but what did you end up doing, Najee, to really help you to do that on your next thread?
I think I just I listened more. Like I started to listen to the meetings instead of just trying to like keep up with them as much. I started to delay. So I would start meetings like 10, 15 minutes behind. So that way I already knew like I heard like maybe the first 10, 15 minutes. So I have an idea of what was being talked about. So then when I go back, I can like listen for it almost, and like, okay, I definitely want to include that. Like I know what's coming in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
So just giving myself live tweeting doesn't have to be like instant, Mm-hmm. I think there's just giving some grace in that regard, and just trying to understand the meeting myself. If I hear things, just me personally, like retaining information, the more I hear it, the more I'll just remember. So just listening first helped, and then going back, because I actually used to watch like most of the meeting first, and then I would just go back and do it again.
Oh, wow.
Which doesn't, every teach their own, but that's just me being over obsessive. But yeah, that for me definitely helped.
Yeah.
Time.
Yep, that's great. That's great advice. Gennifer, what about you? How do you really deal with that pressure to capture everything? I know some of that is you deal with that in your preparation, but that's not all of it. Like, how do you handle that while still delivering a concise and enjoyable thread?
I do use a lot of the YouTube threads or the YouTube streams rather than going in person,
Mm-hmm.
just because if I didn't hear something right, or I need to listen to something again, make sure I'm correct, I have that option. And I think that's always helpful, just to double check yourself, especially if you're not sure. And I think also too, a lot of the pressure that we put on ourselves comes from ourselves. Like nobody else is putting that pressure on you to be perfect but you. If there are things that you don't understand, I feel like documenters are residents. It's okay for us to not understand something, and it's okay for us to say that we don't understand. I mean, there aren't, how many journalists or how many media outlets, period, ever admit that they don't understand something. They're always, trying to fill everything with answers and responses. Where I think it's really okay for us to say, you know what, I've listened the last 5 minutes and I have no idea what they're talking about. I don't understand this, but maybe it's something I can look up or Google real quick, and then I can come up with an article and then tweet out the article and say, okay, I found this and this explains what they're talking about. And then I can stop the YouTube stream. I can go through and read that article real quick myself, get an understanding of what they're talking about, and then go back and restart the meeting. I think now that I'm doing more live tweeting in person, I'm trying not to rely on rewinding YouTube as much. But I do think, especially when you're starting out, give yourself that freedom, and it may, and let yourself be confused, take the time to stop and learn about it. All of that is going to help you in the long run. And I feel like also understanding that there's a learning curve. None of us are going to be perfect the first few times we do it. Like I would say, give it like 3 months of live tweeting, and then look at your last live tweet thread that you did, and then go back and look at the first, and you can see all the improvements and all the things you've learned as you're going on.
Gennifer, that point about, I feel like that point about like not knowing and stating that you don't know, not being negative. That's anyone who sat through our trainings and orientations and even like our gatherings know I talk about the power of asking questions in public. And I really feel like that exists in the notes, but because Twitter is out there right away, that like it's the place where those questions have the most power. Like, I don't understand this, allows the most, like there's many other people to actually also see that and understand, like, oh, I don't understand that either. And maybe someone drops in with a question. I feel like it's in those spots that and like I don't have empirical evidence of this, but I feel like it's in those spots that I most frequently see folks engaging with documenters on the Twitter thread, or like asking other questions or dropping in with other information. If you don't say you don't know, none of that happens. And I often learn a bunch from some folks who know some things or some other conversations that happen, and all those folks are sort of engaged in this meeting who otherwise would not have been engaged in it at all. I think there's no place for documenters assignments that happens more and better than on live tweeting assignments. But Dan, what about you? How do you really handle that pressure to capture everything while still like turning in a concise live tweet thread?
Yep. One time I did this Board of Elections meeting that was like, I don't know, 5 hours long, and it was probably like 200 tweets long, because it was like this back and forth, and I felt like I was watching like an episode of Law and Order, because it was like a fake trial. They had like presenting their cases and stuff, and I just got way too into it. And then I was like, I probably didn't need to do that. Like, yeah, my last tweet thread, I just went back to look at it, was around 50 tweets long. And I feel like it could have been shorter. So it's just to say, like, there's probably not a right number or a wrong number. What Gennifer said, you'll get better and more confident about picking what's important and what's not as important as you go on. There's a certain Cleveland City Council person from a certain Southeast side neighborhood who I feel like, I don't know, has a lot of questions. And if I were to be on there, like capturing all of them in real time, I would have a lot of tweets. So I've kind of like had to like learn, like maybe when one council person is asking questions, to like hear what's that line of questioning, right? And then maybe try to summarize it where I can. I didn't name any names. We're not recording. Oh wait, we are recording this.
Oh, I am.
Cool.
We Oh, I was just gonna. I was.
But yeah, I mean, I think like I think just where you can, like, do what you're comfortable with, and don't try to do anything that you're not comfortable with. I once saw a documentary and I was very jealous of their ability to like have little videos embedded. And I was like, I want to do that. I want to put a video in my tweet. And I tried, and I found myself very quickly half an hour behind the actual live meeting. And I was like, oh, I'm not going to do this again until I like figure out how it actually works. Right. So don't try to do anything that you're not comfortable with. Don't try to compare yourself to other live tweeters or to other documenters who may just have a different setup than you, who may be more comfortable with something that you're not as familiar with. And just do what you can.
Yep.
And it takes what it takes, right?
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. You don't need to compare yourself, but also feel free to take and steal and borrow from every other documenter. I mean, I feel like those two things, don't compare, to borrow whatever you see and like. Regina asked exactly in the chat who was that council person, and I don't feel bad at all. I don't think anyone would be surprised, particularly anybody who watched any of the, like, even if you watched 15 minutes of the budget hearings, you know who this person is. It's Council Member Joe Jones. Yes, indeed. As Doug said, it rhymes with Mo Drones. It's Joe Jones. Which watch some Cleveland City Council meetings, and you will see the majesty that is Joe Jones' question asking. Folks, it is 1:05 here in Cleveland, Ohio, so we've reached the halfway mark, a little past the halfway mark of this conversation. So I'd like to open things up to questions from other folks. You can either drop them in the chat, or feel free to, and we're actually going to turn off the spotlight function of Zoom so we can all sort of see each other. So feel free to drop them in the chat, or send them to us all out here, or just speak them out loud is what I mean to say. Sorry, you feel free to speak them out loud as well. We do have a question here from Regina in the chat, and I'd like to put to all of you. What details should you include when tweeting about ordinances or resolutions? They say those numbers very fast. How do the three of you handle that? Gennifer, you first. Oop, you're muted.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
The question is, what details should you include when tweeting about ordinances or resolutions? And Regina says they say those numbers very fast.
Okay. If the agenda is available, then I'll use that to write in the ordinance numbers as they're going, because they'll start reading the ordinance, and if they say the numbers too fast, I can just jump back and look at the agenda and see what they're talking about. Oh, that's the number, and then go ahead and type it in. If those numbers don't exist, or I just don't have time because I'm too busy typing out something else out, I won't use them. I'll just say this ordinance regarding this topic.
Thanks. What about you, Najee? How do you handle including details about ordinances and resolutions? I mean, lots of meetings have them, but I think we're really talking about city council meetings, and where they say them faster than any place else is that Monday city council meeting. But I'm curious, how do you handle that?
Right. So similar to Gennifer, I would just pull from the agenda, or if I felt like it was an ordinance that was like relevant, like to maybe the purpose of the meeting or a discussion, that's when I would use video and just capture it, because there is a lot of words. So like just 2 minutes of them maybe reading like, this is the ordinance, and then I would just screen record it, and then I would talk about it after they read it. And that usually worked well for me.
That's great. That's great. I know Dan mentioned doing screen recording before, and if you can work it out, I mean, I feel like screen recording is good for lots of things, but that is like the best of it. Like allowing a short video clip to just like, you don't need to use those characters. You don't need to type that out. They're saying it. All you really need to do in those live tweet threads, if you're using a screen recorder, is to give context to it. Another one that I've seen is actually using taking crop screen grabs of the ordinance PDF, so you could also just drop it in there. So you don't even have to. You have the numbers. You just drop it in, and then again you could just add context. Regina asked a question here in the chat that I think I can answer. Are emergency ordinances usually on the agenda beforehand? Yes, emergency ordinances are a little funny. As our documentary assignment editor, Doug Rilpatorak, knows, he spent a lot of time digging into emergency ordinances. Yes, they're on the agenda before. Emergency ordinances well, how do I want to say this? What is it, like 90% or more, maybe 95% of the ordinances that city council votes on are emergency ordinances. The word emergency does not quite mean the same thing that it means to you or I in Cleveland City Council. It essentially means they approve that legislation a little bit faster, and they're used to that, so they approve all legislation faster. So there's it's actually rare to see a straight ordinance than an emergency ordinance, but they're all for the most part on the agenda if the agenda's been updated before that. So any other questions from folks? You can drop in the chat, or folks feel free to say them out loud. I have some other questions myself here. Yeah, no problem, Regina.
I was just gonna add on to that. Like that's for the Monday night meeting, which is Regina has taken her swing at I think the last 3 of them, which is very courageous because they're not easy to cover. Especially for your first threads. But I think like to Dan's tip earlier of like double checking the agenda, like shortly before the meeting, because sometimes the finance committee meets. Usually the finance committee meets on Monday, and they might be up. Legislation that they approved there might not be on the agenda when you look at it earlier in the day from the Monday night meeting, but shortly before the meeting starts, it should theoretically, I hope, be updated with everything that'll come through. But yeah.
Which I love how they somehow get around, like they will post an agenda within the legally required, or what, not even legally required by their rules, 12 hours, but it actually won't be the final agenda. The final agenda is not posted 12 hours before the meeting necessarily. But these are more details about Cleveland City Council's legislative processes. I started this conversation asking each of you why you signed up to Documenters.org, why you wanted to become a documenter. I am curious, looking back from now, what do you feel like you got out of being a documenter? And I feel like I didn't have to. No, I'm not. I won't qualify it at all. I would just ask the question. Dan, what about you? What do you feel like you got out of being a? I know what you said you wanted to get out of it. What do you feel like you actually got out of it?
Yeah, $16 an hour. Yeah, but that's been steady. So thank you for that. But I think also like when we had our municipal elections and our primary elections for the mayoral campaign, got that word out right. I have never gone into a local election feeling as informed as I did and this past time, and that is solely because of my participation in Documenters, my ability to like have conversations with my friends and my neighbors about candidates, issues, city council, like has never been as well informed as it was this last time, and that's because of Cleveland Documenters. So in a lot of ways, just like feeling connected to my local government, being aware of my local government. Yeah, that's something I got out of it, in addition to that $16 an hour.
Yeah, it's not a little thing, the $16 an hour. I'd like to make it bigger at some point. But yeah, no, getting paid, whatever. Nobody likes to work for free. And this work is valuable. So, but Gennifer, what about you? What do you feel like you got out of becoming a documenter? Like I said, you talked a little bit about why you started, but what do you feel like you have in your hands 3 years in or 2.5 years in as it is?
I feel like I know a lot more about how, like Dan said, just being aware of my local government, which I very rarely did before now. I know how the federal government operates, and when I was overseas, I learned everything about how the UK government operates from the journalism perspective. And then I come back here and all this local government, it's like 90% different. So, I had to learn a lot of things that I never knew before, but were always going on around me, so I think it has made me much more aware of like when I'm out and about around the city or going out to events and meeting people and that. I'm much more engaged with what we're doing right here in Cleveland and who people are. and making connections and doing all of that. That's really been the biggest thing for me.
Mhm. What about you, Najee? What do you feel like you got? What have you gotten? Maybe is the way I want to phrase that, out of being a documenter.
Yeah, I would echo basically what Gennifer and Dan said, and just, networking for sure, opportunities to meet different people, very interesting people, having a better understanding of local government, how it works, which I think if you have an understanding of that, then it offers a broader understanding of how national government can and should work. But just just a simple, knowing what's going on in your neighborhood is refreshing. And now I find people asking me like, oh, do you know about XYZ elemental P? And I'm like, well, a matter of fact, and that's always a nice feeling when you can help somebody who genuinely has a concern or a question. So, and it's taught me how to pull resources a lot better too. There's a lot of information out there and it should be accessible. And I think Documenters does a great job of that. But I also think we have a ways to go. So I think just making government seem less scary.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. We have a question in the chat from Nora, and it's not a repeat question, but Nora's curious, what kind of skills do you feel like you've all gotten from live tweeting that carry over to your personal interests? So we've talked a little bit about live tweeting specific skills, but what sort of skills, or do you feel like there are any skills from your live tweeting that have carried over into your personal interests? Toss it to maybe Dan.
Yeah, I don't know about live tweeting specifically carrying over into anything. But I think being part of Documenters definitely has like taught me how and where to go look up public records related to things that matter to me. When I'm having a conversation with somebody who's like passionate about an issue, wants to get like involved or engage with local government on that issue, like I know how to help them find upcoming council meetings, find information, find what was talked about at a committee meeting, that kind of thing. So maybe that's more like the public records side of things. But that was something like I knew vaguely existed somehow and didn't know that, had no idea how to even begin approaching that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Gennifer? How have the skills you've learned from live tweeting carried over into your personal interest in life?
I don't know that the skills themselves have transferred over, other than they do make me a little bit of a faster writer and a faster thinker when I'm writing. Like, because I have that structure so ingrained in my head, it's now easier to spit out things in a very short number. Like, it's almost helped me like condense information, like help teach me how to condense information more. And so I feel like my sentences when I write are gradually becoming more condensed and information filled.
That's interesting.
And like personally for me, I'm a huge extrovert. So when I get on Twitter and live tweet, like I've got followers coming on to me and all that. And I've actually met some of those folks in real life, based on having met them through Documenters. And I would say most of them are pretty cool. There's been a few followers that I have been questionable. But I met
no stalkers yet. Hopefully, no. I don't think we've had any documentary stalkers as of yet.
No, not at all. Thank God. And but one of our followers and who also works with Documenters now is my next door neighbor.
Oh.
We didn't realize it until we found I had posted something about being outdoors, and I posted a picture, and he went, "Oh, you live next door to me," and so now we're kind of buddies, and we've gone out drinking a couple of times and gone to different events together and that, and it's great. So so I think it's been helpful that way as well, as just building connections, and for me, just making friends.
That's great. That actually raises another issue for me that I wanted to ask about. But before I do, I just want to also drop in. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to drop in the chat or just raise a hand and or just speak them out as long as somebody else is not answering your question in that moment. It's totally fine. This is a pretty loose and informal space. So please feel free. But on that sort of point about, I don't know, making friends and building relationships via the work that you're doing, like all three of you, I mean, I said this earlier, but all three of you, your live tweet threads are great. They're informative, they're concise, they're accessible, but it also feels like you're having a good time. Reading your threads is a good time, and it also feels like you're having a good time. And I'm curious at like what point in live tweeting you've got to that, and like what helped you get to, like, you know, we've talked a little bit about what helped you make the information accessible and like write it out and be clear. But what helped? What was the thing that got you to like have fun with it? Najee, maybe if you could answer that question.
Consistency probably helped me just stay like I had control over the situation, because like when I first started, I just felt like I didn't have control over it. But when I understood like this is my space, and if I'm doing this, I can do it the way I want to do it, has really just made it a whole new experience, you know. And you know, just throwing a little bit of spice in there, you know, just a little bit. You know, they give you some stuff. Sometimes there's drama. The kids love drama. Be like, ooh, a little spicy look between so and so. You know, it's okay. You know, but that if it happened in the meeting, then it's something to talk about.
That's great.
But just keep it. You know, it can't just be the same black and white every time. I think everything just needs a splash of color.
Yep. Najee, you said something that I feel like we try to impart, but I don't think we ever said it that clearly, that concisely. But like that idea that you, whether it's notes or live tweeting, like it's your space to do with how you want. Like there's things that we want out of that, but the rest of that is really yours, and you can own it. I don't think I need to start saying that clearly, because I think that really gets to what we want folks to feel. Like, not that you're doing this work for us, but you're doing this work for, it's your work. Like and yeah, that makes lots of sense. Dan, what about you? How did you, like, at what point did you really feel like, I don't know, comfortable enough to have fun? Like it was fun. How did you get to that point?
Yeah, so I think when I did the training, I think you said, Lawrence, like, be yourself, bring your own personality. Right?
All right.
And I was like, well, let's see if they really meant that. You know? So I don't know. I'm gonna try to sprinkle bad jokes into anything I do. But I will say, like, there are things that we cover that feel like they are routine and monotonous and just sort of like talking about a salt dome installation. Like, that's a place where I feel like we could probably, like, I don't know, find a way to make a bad joke. But there's other things that are really heavy and are really serious and, like, you know, deserve the weight that they have on their own, right? And that's places where I think it's just like you need to be able to, like, have a sense of awareness and, like, you know when you can play around and when you should just, like, report the facts, right? So yeah, and I think that goes also back to, like, when is it appropriate to, like, kind of get just the minimum of information versus when is it pay off to be able to go deep and make sure you get those quotes exactly right. So yeah. I can't hear you.
Muted, Lawrence.
Sorry. I can't believe it's almost been an hour, and I've only done that once so far. Anastasia has a question in the chat. What is the salt dome? I think I know, but I'm not sure.
I was walking by the salt dome right by my house, and I'm like, we need a new salt dome. It's like the big like warehouse where they dump all the road salt.
Oh, like you see it by the side of the road, and it's domed so that the snow doesn't stay on it, right? That's
yeah.
I think that's it.
Protect the salt.
Gennifer, you, I mean, not only you, I mean, all of you guys have fun threads, but I think you in particular are known for having a good time with your threads. And you're even at this point known by a few Cleveland City Council members for having a good time sometimes with them. Brian Casey and his Prince-like paisley ties as well. occasionally no tie. But how did you get to that point where you felt comfortable enough to have a good time in doing a documenter's assignment?
For me, I'm always going to be comfortable doing that because I have a really bizarre and out there sense of humor, and I take very, very little seriously, and especially politicians. Like like Dan said, there's a time when it's okay to use and a time when it's not. I have no problem making fun of a politician for the color of their shirt, or the fact that Mike Polenzek can't pronounce what was the word, philanthropic. He
Oh,
couldn't
yeah.
pronounce that. So I will make fun of him all day for
I think
that
he
kind
still
of
owes you
stuff.
25 cents, right?
He does.
He
He owes
does.
me 25 cents, and I make sure every time I tweet about him, I put a line in there that says, Ward 8 council member Mike Polenzek, comma, who still owes me 25 cents, comma, and then whatever he said or was talking about. So I'm always taking little digs in them that way, but that's my personality to do that. And so I would say, like, you really just want to be your authentic personality. And if your authentic personality is way more serious than somebody like me, maybe that kind of approaching it that way won't work for you, or maybe there's something else that you would pick up on, like I did with their fashion sense. I will, grade people's ties, and during budget hearings, Casey lost this year's fashion award to one of the female council members because her suit game was just totally on. So, I can play with those things a bit. If that's not something you're comfortable doing, then don't do it, or, you could do something like, if you, show it, if you have a really cool coffee cup and you're sitting down to do on YouTube with a thread, show, put your coffee cup in front of the screen and take a picture of it and show us your really cool coffee cup that you're drinking from while you're covering the YouTube thread. You can do things like that rather than trying to be funny. Whatever is I have a Wu-Tang Clan coffee cup, and I will show that thing off to as many people as I can. I love it.
The thread where you did that at the top for one of the budget hearings and started your budget hearing thread saying cash rules everything around me. Chef's kiss.
Yeah.
It was fantastic.
Yeah.
It is 1:26, folks. Oh, go ahead, Gennifer.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say that just comes from me being me. So as long as you're being you and it comes across authentic, it's going to work out fine.
Yep, that's great. Folks, it is 1:26, and I think we have time for maybe one more question. And it's a question. Well, anyway, let me just ask the question. Is there anything else you think? And I will say we're recording this. We have a few folks here, but we're recording this. We may end up sharing this to folks across the Documenters Network. So with that in mind, is there anything else you think a documenter who's thinking about taking their first live tweeting assignment, or maybe even someone who's taken a few but wants to get more under their belt, what should that person know about live tweeting that we haven't already talked about today?
I would say that live tweeting in person, like physically going to City Hall and sitting in on the committee meeting, is way different. It's a different experience than live tweeting from home, sitting in front of your computer with the YouTube thread. And the biggest difference is that you don't have the luxury of rewind. So I would say if you are gonna, if you do want to make the jump to going into tweeting in person, definitely you want to get the experience and have it all under your belt and know things from doing it at home at YouTube first. I would never recommend to someone who is beginning to live tweet for like the first 2-3 months to go in person. And I would say if you do go in person, have a documenter with, like, if we do a pairing up kind of thing, where you take someone with you and just sort of shadow them,
Mm.
like a documenter who's done in person before, so you can see those differences. I think that's really important and really helpful. But it is a major difference between the two, and I would not recommend if you're just starting out.
That's interesting. We've had so many documenters, I feel like, over the, maybe it's just coming out of the pandemic, but asking us, new folks and other folks asking us if we could set up some sort of, if shadowing was available. So I'd love to, as we start doing more in-person meetings, I don't think it makes sense for remote meetings, but I'd love to figure out a process for that. But putting that in the back of my head for later. Dan or Najee, what about you? Well, did you have anything that you would say to documenters who's something that they should know that we haven't already talked about for someone who was thinking about taking a live tweeting assignment?
Yeah, I would just say you can't fail. Like, you might get things wrong. You might not, do everything you thought you were going to do, but you have a pretty phenomenal team backing you up. Anastasia and Doug, Mary Ellen doing the editing, and somebody else is taking notes. Like, if everything goes, even like, I don't know, if your like thread collapses and deletes itself, like the stakes are low, right? We got the information somewhere. It's on YouTube. Like, this isn't like a treasure that's been lost. So do what you can, and know that, and just to put another like pin in what I think Gennifer was saying earlier about saying I don't know. That's a really powerful moment. So even if you don't know what the heck is going on, saying that is power. So yeah, you can't fail, whatever you do. If you don't know what's going on, cool, say it. If you don't know how to tweet, you'll learn. So
Yep. That's great. That's great advice. What about you, Najee? Any advice or just something you would say to someone who's thinking about taking their first live tweeting assignment?
Yeah, just be bold, be creative. I think if you are live tweeting, it's good to know who maybe is taking notes. Because there was a time where I was supposed to attend the meeting, but there was no audio to the meeting, and it was on web. It wasn't on YouTube. It was one of those that you couldn't even stream. Yeah, and it was a nightmare. So when I reached out to the note taker, I found out that she had the same issue I did. And so we were able to reach out to somebody, I think maybe Doug, and then it all worked out where we ended up getting compensated for our time. So it just worked out because we actually spoke to one another. So, and just know you're not alone, and I think it helps when somebody else is like doing it too. So it's not, like Dan was saying, it's not all on you if something doesn't work out or if you're not able to complete it. So yeah, but just take it easy. I mean, it's really Hakuna Matata. Just live and let live.
And that is a fantastic note to end this on. Najee, Dan, Gennifer, thank you so much for doing this, agreeing to do this panel and talking about your live tweeting experience today. I really, really appreciate it. Thanks to everybody for joining us. And of course, thanks to Doug and Anastasia for working the back end for us. This video, I'll get this uploaded onto YouTube and share it out with all Cleveland documenters, and I think very likely we'll share it out with the entire Documenters Network. Thanks a lot. I'm Lawrence Caswell, part of the Cleveland Documenters team. Thanks for joining us, folks. Have a good day.